Well, I'm here today with Dan Sweaza. He's the lead pastor of Connect Church here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And Dan is becoming a great friend of ours. He is actually the closest church planter and church geographically to where we'll be planting, and we actually live just two communities from each other. So we'll be doing a lot together to kind of collaborate for our community and work together. And Dan and his church launched this past September. So they're about 6-7 months old.
Yeah, 6 months old.
6 months old now. And so he has some really unique things that they did in the year getting ready. So we're in the launch phase of the church planting phases right now, and we've discussed things like naming your church and constitution, bylaws, all those type of things we've already discussed. But now I want to focus today on just hearing how Connect Church and Dan and his wife Amber and their launch team really just invest in the community to not just advertise a church, but really to build rapport and get to know people in order to get ready for the first public worship service that they had. I think it was September the 11th, of 2016. So Dan, thanks for joining us today. We do appreciate it. And tell us a little bit about how you and your wife got up here to Calgary.
Okay, so I was a student pastor back in the U.S. for 16 years. I worked in churches in Texas and in Florida. And for the last 10 years of those 16, I worked at a particular Southern Baptist church in Central Florida. Part of my job was to take short-term mission trips, lead those up with our students and adults throughout the year. And we came up here to Calgary on a short-term mission trip in 2014, I believe it was. And God just really broke our hearts over the city. We saw the need for churches, the lostness everywhere, the wealth and affluence that kind of gave people the idea that they didn't need Jesus. And so God called us to this place before he ever really gave us a church planting call. We went back to Florida thinking, okay, let's send some funds, let's send some teams, that sort of thing, to help the guys who were up here on the ground. But we ended up realizing pretty quickly that wasn't going to cut it. God was actually calling us to plant a church. So in summer of 2015, we ended up moving up here. We spent a year in the community development phase and research and exploration phase so that we could know what it's like to live in Canada, to be a church planter in Canada, to plant as much as we can a Canadian church with an American pastor.
Right, which is what many of us are doing, including myself.
That's
and
right.
So Dan has already been a wealth of information for me because like I said, we're in the same kind of geographical area, two communities across. We're both in Simons Valley, which is about 5 different communities together, and so we are kind of going after that. So a lot of the background stuff, a lot of the research, a lot of things, I was bouncing off of him, picking his brain, learning from him because he's been here and he's been doing it. And one of the things, especially why I wanted you in for this kind of interview lecture today, this is not a thing to brag on necessarily you about. This is what God has done through your church, but Connect did have the largest launch service day in the Canadian National Baptist history for here in Calgary, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And so that's an exciting thing. I think it was 185 people.
189.
189.
We're going to count those extra 4.
You found those 4 hiding in the back, right? And that's really unheard of for a city like Calgary, where very post-Christian cities where the average church is 50, maybe 60 average attendance. There are a few larger churches, but there's not that many, the average. And so to have that many at your launch is just a fantastic thing. It really speaks well of the preparation work that you guys did. So that's why I want to just let our students learn today about what you guys did. So just kind of walk us through that. Is almost a year or so, I guess, you were kind of preparing, getting ready for that launch day. Just walk us through some of the things you did, some of the practical tips, things you learned, and just some good ideas that would be good for our students to maybe think about how they can use them in their own context where God lead them to plant.
Yeah, so for us, what it really came down to was the fact that we parachuted into Calgary. We didn't bring a team. It was my wife and I moving from Central Florida up here. And so honestly, that's the worst way to plant a church. It's a terrible strategy. If you can get away with not doing that by any measure, please don't do it that way.
We're doing it, by the way.
It's just so hard, because you don't know anybody here on the ground. You're not bringing anybody with you. So literally any team you develop has to be developed actually on site. And it takes time, especially here in Canada, where the relationships are a little bit slower to develop, especially between Christians and non-believers, because there's a bit of suspicion, I think, about the Americans that are coming up here to start churches. So in any case, because of that, what we knew we had to do was come up here, and as we started to develop our launch team, we had to look for intersection between what we wanted to do and what the people in our community were actually looking for. for. Because almost nobody in our community is looking for a new church. If they were looking for a church, they would have already found a church. What we think is they're looking for a church, they just don't realize it yet. And so we want to create an environment, some sort of event, some activities, or build some relationships so that we can get to know them and then help them to uncover this God yearning that's inside of their heart. We said from the very beginning, we believe strongly that your launch team is already there in your city. God has them. He knows who they are. Your job is simply to find them. And so if you keep that in mind, I'm not building or creating or manufacturing a launch team. I'm looking for the launch team that God has already had for us. That gave us some perspective on how to approach things, and it honestly gave us encouragement on those tough days.
Yeah, I always said that, because people asked us, I had some friends who were coming to Winston-Salem to plant, which is the city we came out of, and they had 30 or so moved from a whole other city. One actually had 30 from Orlando moving up with him to plant in Winston, and we were like, oh, it's great, glad you have that team. And they said, oh, so how about your team? I'm like, it's me, my wife. Oh, we have a 19-month-old son and a dog.
Yeah,
and then we have a grad student from our church who's going to be up there doing school, and that's it. And so I really resonate. But I always said that the future pastor who's going to take my place, the future small group leaders for our church, the future deacons, whatever you have, they're already in the community. They just don't know it yet.
That's right.
They just don't know it yet. So
and that starts the first thing that we did. I spoke with a missions pastor who was up here kind of on a vision tour, learning what God was doing in the city, and we sat down and had dinner, and he said, hey, listen, I cannot overemphasize the need to start prayer walking your community. And that was something that I had read about in church books, and I thought, sure, I guess I should do that at some point. But there was something about the way he communicated that really stuck with me. And so my wife and I made the commitment to prayer walk through our entire community on a regular basis. We ended up doing it several times. There are about 6,000 homes in our area. So to walk and to pray over 6,000 homes was incredible. But here's the great thing about it, is that as I'm walking down the road and I'm praying as I walk over each of these homes, I'm saying to myself, Lord, I don't know who's in this home, but I believe by faith that this is my future children's worker, and this is one of our future elders, and this is somebody who's going to be saved and their life is going to be transformed, and families for generations are going to be impacted by this. And what we're seeing at Connect now is that these people that I walked by and prayed for their home, they've come to Connect, they've started to make relationships, they invite us over, and I'm telling you, in every single case, I remember the day I walked down their road and prayed, maybe not specifically for their house, but I remember when I was in their section of the community praying over those homes, and I get emotional over that, you know what I mean, because it's not just naive words like, oh, you need to prayer walk. That's important. We know that. That's obvious. But man, does it pay off. So that was the first strategy that we did. And I would encourage anybody who's planting a church to make prayer the priority. And then also it helps you as you're in your community. You're going to run into people out in their front yard. You're going to learn kind of traffic patterns, when the buses run. You're going to get a sense of all of that stuff. And that's just by walking and praying through your community on a regular basis. So we ended up coming up here in the end of July, and from July until January, we didn't do any specific or focused ministry. We didn't do anything officially. We just built relationships and learned the neighborhood by prayer walking, hanging out in coffee shops, those sorts of things. After the turn of the year 2016, we started focusing specifically on holding events and activities that we could invite people to. In the beginning, it was people that we'd already built relationships with, and then over time, we began to expand that out so that it included, strangers essentially in the neighborhoods. Of course, we always refer to everybody as neighbors because we are. And what we found as we were researching and studying our community was that people here want connection. They want community. They feel like they're surrounded by people. Homes are 9 feet apart from one another here, so they're very close together. And yet, people don't feel like they know their neighbors. They don't feel like they have deep relationships and friendships outside of one or two other folks. And so we consistently heard people saying, I don't know that we need a church necessarily, but we need some sort of community organization that would help us to develop community and get to know our neighbors. And so for us, that became the intersection point, right? Because we know that the church is essentially community. That's what it is. It's family, it's relationship, it's fellowship in Christ. And the community around us is looking for that. They just don't have the right words for it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, we said that's going to be our strategy. Everything we do is going to be geared towards bringing people in our community together. And so every activity was kind of with that in mind. And that's the way we advertised everything as well. Mm-hmm. So our primary strategy to develop a launch team revolved around what we called interest meetings. I have friends who've started calling them startup parties, and I think that's much better language. I think it really works well. Everybody gets excited about a party. Nobody gets excited about a meeting, but so essentially what we did, and this was our particular strategy, it won't work in every context, but what we did was we rented out a local restaurant that was only open for breakfast and lunch. They were free in the evenings, and we went to them, we told them who we were, what we wanted to do. We were a church that was starting in the area. We wanted to rent the restaurant and hold meetings for anybody who might be interested in hearing about a new church. And they said yeah, and so that's what we ended up doing. Now, when we presented that to our community, we didn't highlight or emphasize the fact that it was a talk about a new church. We told people that they were going to hear about a new church that was starting, but when we advertised it, I advertised it, number one, as the opportunity to go have a free meal at a trendy new restaurant. And who wants, nobody's going to say no to that. And it was a chance to meet your neighbors. Yeah. So that's what our community cares about. We want them to hear about the church. And so those meals became that intersection point. So we started hosting those in March, I believe, and we ran them all the way through August of 2016. So we did once a month. Okay. And we would rent out the entire restaurant. We would cater dinner, so we had the cook staff prepare food for everybody there. It was a fixed menu. And then we literally just saturated our area with invitations. And we said, anybody is welcome to come. You don't have to be religious. In fact, this is more about you meeting your neighbors and enjoying a free meal on us. And that strategy worked very well for us. Our first interest social, I think we had about 60 people that showed up. The second one, we had 95 people that showed up. And then we settled back in around 50 for the rest of them moving forward. And those became great because we got to, I guess, demonstrate generosity. So we were paying, $12 to $15 a head for everybody to come in and have dinner. We were able to scratch a felt need in the community. They wanted to develop friendships and relationships. So we gave them that opportunity. And then I took 15 to 20 minutes, sometimes 25, at each one of those dinners, and I cast vision for our church. And when we cast vision, we always did it with the lost person in mind. Like, you may not be looking for a church like this, but I bet you've got somebody in your life that would love to find a spiritual community that would allow them to come in and express their questions and kind of explore at their own pace. And so we cast vision even there with the lost person in mind. And then we said to people who were already believers, this is the kind of church you want to be a part of so that you can invite your lost friends and family to. So that was our primary strategy. It worked very well for us. We developed most of our launch team from that particular strategy. The other things that we did, I may have gone a little out of order here. So we decided we were going to cast our net really, really wide and then start walking people down the funnel, so to speak, of commitment. And so that interest social was kind of the middle section of the funnel where we moved people from being vaguely aware of us and having come to one or two of our community events to the point that they actually say yes or no, I want to commit. I'm going to be a part of the church. So on the wider side of things, on the more community side of things, we just tried to come up with ideas that would engage our community and help them to come out and get the chance to meet them. So our first major event was a food truck rally that we did. My wife had the idea. I thought it was ridiculous. I was like, nobody's going to come to a food truck rally in Evanston. It's way on the outskirts of the city. And she said, no, I think this could work. And so we put it together. And we had expected 500 to 600 people to come out. If we had anywhere close to 1,000, we would have lost our minds in excitement. And by the time the day was over, we had almost 3,000 people show up for the event. I mean, it was mind-boggling. And of course, that was our first event. And so we're like, oh, this is wonderful. It came back to bite us when we did our second event, and only about 150 people showed up, because that feels like a massive failure, although it's still a great success. So we did things like that. We did block parties, which is a very common strategy for church planters. We just took over a park. We tried to come up with creative ideas to engage families. So we have all the food that you would typically have at a block party, popcorn and cotton candy and snow cones and things like that. We bought Disney character costumes from Amazon, like really bootleg Disney character costumes made in China and shipped over here from, from there. And then we would put the costumes on, and we would literally go to parks randomly, like flash mob style. And we would bring helium tanks with balloons with our logo and website on it. And then we would just go out and take pictures. And kids would come running from every area of the park because they're seeing Elsa and Olaf and Belle and all these other characters that they're so familiar with. And so then parents would come over and they would say, who are you guys and what are you doing? And we'd give them an invitation to one of our interest socials. So we did some things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I appreciate you sharing. This is really good stuff. I mean, just start with prayer walking, hosting this kind of smaller startup parties.
Yep.
I think you said is the better way to call it. I think that's a great idea. We've talked about just hosting dinner parties and things. It's basically the same idea in a lot of ways. And then start thinking of different events. They can just really just bring the community together and really just getting your name out there in a lot of ways. It's just saying, hey, we are in the community, we're for the community, and we're not trying to sell you anything. We just want you to see how you can connect with others. So, man, thanks for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
Of course.
All right.